friends, my name is Elle and this is David, and you are watching the Grow Students Deep Dive for the series called RAD from Volume 5. We are super excited to walk you through this one. It is written by our very own David, who you are seeing on camera right now. Super excited. What we're going to do in this video is to first give you like a big picture overview of the series, but then we're also going to get really specific in a few different ways to help you figure out how to make the most of the series and also know like what's coming up and what you can prepare for.
Yeah, and if you're a Grow user, this is a great way for you to get a head start on the series and start preparing for the series. And if you're not a Grow user, no worries. It's all good. You can take tips and tricks from what we do for this series and apply it to your own ministry context. But here's kind of the structure of what the deep dive is going to look like. First, we'll give you the series overview. Then we'll look at the theme. Then we'll look at the structure. And then finally, we'll give you some tips on how to get everything started for the series.
Love it. Let's do it.
All right, here's a quick overview on the series RAD. So RAD is based on the book of James, but it's got this 90s vibe. It's really cool. And so the book of James is packed full of practical advice on how to live a rad life. And in this case, we're using the word rad, which is short for radical, kind of like that play towards the 90s of totally radical man, surfer vibes, skateboard vibes, all that sort of thing. But in this case, rad is someone who lives in the way of following Jesus, because we know that Jesus lives a pretty radical life in terms of being kind of against the grain and going against the flow at times. But we're also labeling the series a series about loving others, because as Christians, that's what we are called to do, is to love others. Look at the greatest commandment that Jesus said, to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And we think the book of James is perfectly a good way to describe this and a good way to teach this to students.
Yeah, so kind of like the way that we're explaining to students like the book of James is that James is really practical advice that is based on the teachings of Jesus, because as we know, James was kind of Jesus' brother. He was always around hearing Jesus' teachings. So James, what he's doing in this book is to kind of give us like these really practical takeaways of how we can live more like Jesus. So that's the idea. And what we've done is, so every week of the series is really focused, as we've said, from the book of James. But then we've also chosen like secondary passages for each week to help kind of bulk up and support each of these ideas, because James, he's not going to give you like a ton of like theology wrapped around these things that he's giving you. He's going to say like, hey, don't show favoritism. And so we need a little bit more scriptural support to kind of help students understand the idea there. So we've given you that, but we would encourage you to make sure that you do that. Otherwise, the series, James might kind of feel like it's falling a little bit flat if you're not bulking it up with more content about Jesus and just more passages from other parts of scripture. So do that. And hopefully all of that combined with this like fun, like 90s vibe and like video clips and stuff will really help the series like hit home for your students.
Yeah, and so here's how it's going to work week by week. In week 1, we're going to take a look at what James says about listening. And so as you teach, you will see how James is really clear about the subject. I mean, he says it very explicitly. He says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and to anger. And so this is definitely a radical way of living just in our world today, about being quick to listen. And so this week, it's all about how we can become better listeners. And the big idea for the week is radical people listen more than they speak.
And then in week 2, we're talking about favoritism and how you should probably not show favoritism. That is not the way of Jesus, not ideal. But what we do in this week that I'm excited about is we really help students think about the difference between like having favorite people and showing unfair favoritism. So we really kind of help students think about that, because it is important for your students to like have close relationships. They don't have to be friends with everybody and like have no boundaries. But what we're trying to get at here is that students are not accidentally practicing like judgment and injustice and unfairness in the way that they treat others. So the big idea for this week, for week 2, is radical people don't play favorites.
Yes, and then we're moving on to week 3, and we'll see what James has to say about watching our words. And so this is such an important lesson for students to learn, because words matter, and what we say has the power to uplift and to tear down, whether that's actual words literally spoken out of our mouths or words written on social media posts, on comments, on Instagram, TikTok, all that sort of thing. And in fact, James goes to say that the claims that the tongue is so small, it can have huge ramifications. And how true is that today? And how important is that for our students to learn in this time? And so the big idea for this week is that radical people watch their words.
And then the final week, we're talking about peacemaking, which we're kind of putting like an interesting spin on this because the idea that James really teaches is that peace isn't just something that happens, but actually something that you have to fight for. So the big idea for this week is that radical people fight for peace.
Yes. And overall, I think one of the greatest things and what Elle said is that this series is so practical. Like we just said, like the big ideas are practical. James is practical, straight from the scripture. And so like this is such a concrete way for students to live their life, but also be grounded from a biblical perspective as well from the book of James. So once again, here are the takeaways that we're going to go through in the series Rad. So we have to listen more than we speak. We figure out the difference between playing favorites and having favorites, watching our words, and fighting for peace.
Okay, so let's talk about the theme for this series. Like we've mentioned, it's a whole 90s vibe. Hopefully, you've noticed that like 90s fashion trends are officially back, which is really, truly a delight. I am very pleased with that. So, we are going to capitalize on that whole theme and go all 90s all the time in the series. We're going to be talking 90s fashion trends, 90s slang, 90s music. And every week of the series has a 90s TV show clip involved with it. So we recommend those. You don't have to use those if you don't want to. They're not essential, but we think they're really fun. Get a little taste of like the Fresh Prince and Full House and just like all the classics from the 90s. So check those out if you would like to. And yeah, that's kind of how we're weaving that in throughout the whole series.
Yeah. So let's just go off the 90s vibe. I would love to see all your rooms and your youth spaces and worship spaces just decked out in 90s gear, fashion, all the things for the 90s. You act like make it totally rad, like just like the series, like make your room rad and totally rad, just like throw it back to the 90s. So for those of you who are creative, like go all out, but if you're not the super creative type or maybe you need a little bit of help like creating some of this stuff, we have given you guys a room design for you to design your space. So I'm just going to give you a quick kind of overview of what this room design looks like. Essentially, just get a big backdrop and you kind of paint the series two colors in half vertically. You'll see there on the picture of what that looks like. And then what I want you to do is go to your thrift store and collect all the 90s like VHS tapes that you can find. And you want to cut the cover out and just like put them onto the backdrop, whether that's like you stick them on there, you hang them up on there, you tape them out there, just figure out a way to put them out there, but put them all over. Like I want to see some Jurassic Park, maybe some Star Wars or something like that on there. Just all the classic 90 movies, like just put it on your backdrop. And then if you want to even go the extra mile, here's what you can do. And if you do this, post it in our Facebook group because I would love to see it and it'll be just super fantastic. If you can find an old 90s tube TV and you are able to find a way to hook up your computer to project the graphic, the rad graphic, that would be fantastic. That would be so cool if you did that. Please let us know if you did it. If you can't get it to work on the tube TV, you can like spray paint the graphic on there. Maybe just spray paint it like white or black or something like that. Like paint the TV screen white and then spray paint the graphic black or some sort of combination like that. I think that would be super cool. So please let us know what you do for your room design. I think this will be so cool. Your students will love it. It'll be great.
Yes, I am so happy. And I love this room design because it just reminds me of like Blockbuster, you know? It's the best. And if you can't find the actual VHS tapes, that is also okay. Because what you could do is just like get cardboard boxes or something, like make your own fake VHS covers and like print your favorite 90s classic movies out. Just make it feel like Blockbuster though. That's what I want to see because I miss Blockbuster. I miss it. But whatever you do, we've given you tons of instructions in the curriculum. So just go look at that and, put your own creative spin on it. But you do have instructions in there to kind of reference.
Yes, and here's the last thing to make the theme come alive even more so. So if the room design isn't enough, here's more ways to make this more of a 90s vibe for you. So we've got games for you that kind of fit like this 90s vibe as well, or like playoff words from 90s themed things. Worship songs, we've given you worship songs that you can do. Also, look in the worship songs. We throw in a special treat there with "Awesome God" by Rich Mullins, which is a total '90s throwback. So, like, I don't know if your students will like it or not, but you could totally throw it in there for all of you that would listen to worship music in the '90s. So that's fantastic. They're all about being a radical person and loving other people. We also have just for fun songs that are really good in there. We have some '90s songs, but we also have some songs that talk about love that are appropriate for youth group as well too. So definitely check those out, and I think that'll make your series just that much more rounded and more 90s, and your students will feel very much immersed in this series and you totally get that 90s vibe. So go for it, and don't forget to post on the Facebook group what you do.
Okay, so let's talk about the structure of the series. If you're familiar with Grow, then you know that every single week of curriculum has sort of the same structure, but also every week is totally different. So the thing that's always the same is we always give you these 3 sections. What, which is what are we talking about? Kind of the fun intro. So what is like, why should I care about this? What does God have to say about it? And then now what is like the application section. What should I go do with the stuff that I've learned? So that's the thing that's always the same. But every series is kind of structured a little bit differently. So what we want to do here is just to kind of draw your attention to a couple of the things that are like interesting and unique about this series that will make it feel a little bit different from the series that come before and after this one.
Yes, and so for RAD specifically, here are some of the things that make this series unique. So the first thing is the opening clips for TV shows. So in every single week of the series, there will be a TV show clip that you can use. It's from a 90s show, so feel free to use that. But you don't have to use them if you don't want to. They're kind of up to you if you want to use them or not. But I think they'll be a great like introduction, great opening activity for students to kind of get them in the mood. My favorite one is from week 4. It's from the TV show Saved by the Bell, episode called The Fight, where Zach and Slater fight over a girl. All right, and the second thing that's unique about this series is a module called That's Rad. So every single week of this series, there's a module called That's Rad. And essentially, we're just trying to explain the word rad because let's be honest, sometimes your students may not catch this or they weren't born in the 90s. So we kind of need to explain what the word rad means and how it connects to the series and to the Bible. And so that way they can understand. And if you have students that show up for 1 week and not the other week, they can kind of get a feeling for the word rad and the whole theme of the series. And then the third thing that I love about this and this unique about RAD is that there's handouts for 2 out of the 4 weeks. And so these are just opportunities for your students just to get really kind of reflective and responsive and have them just kind of write down handouts and kind of be very introspective about what's going on. And it's kind of a good summary way to end your teaching. And Elle's actually going to tell us a little bit about these handouts just now.
Yeah, so in week 2, that's the week where we're talking about favoritism. The handout here is really meant to be like a time of reflection to help them think about like, have I ever actually shown favoritism before? And spoiler alert, the answer is probably going to be yes. Things like who have I excluded? Who have I hurt because I've excluded or like shown favoritism? Stuff like that, just to get them kind of like really honest and thinking about the impact that they may have made on others, whether they meant to or not. And then in week 3, where we're going to be talking about watching our words, students are actually going to write down like one thing that they said that was either helpful or hurtful, to just kind of help them like really analyze the words that they're saying, either that they said in the past, or you could even put it into like the future of like, hey, this week, hang on to this, and like write down things that you say and help categorize like, were they helpful or were they hurtful?
Yes, that's awesome. I think those handouts are going to be super awesome. I think they'll be super helpful for our students. Okay, so now we've covered the overview. We've done the theme. We've done the structure. And so now we just have some miscellaneous tips for you to make the most out of your series and to make it the best possible series you can teach your students. All right, tip number 1. Refresh your memory on the book of James. So since this whole series is on the book of James, I think it'd be really great for you just to read the book of James and just refresh your memory on just what it says, what's the structure like, what's the flow like. It's only 5 chapters, so you can totally read it either like before you teach, recommendedly before you teach, would be great. But also if you want to do some like commentary and some study Bible reading over this book, we give you some commentary and some structure in there, but the more the merrier, the more that you know, the better that you can teach. So refresh your memory, read the book of James.
The more you know. I love it. Tip number 2, friends, just be aware of like the relationship drama that is happening or that has happened with your students. Because this whole series is about like how we treat each other, there are going to be like some conversations that might pop up, maybe about times that they felt excluded, that they felt like other students, maybe even in your youth group, had shown favoritism or excluded them. Maybe when other students were like harsh to them with their words. There's a lot of like different ways that this could go. Some students might feel like they are the recipients of like this bad behavior, while others will realize like, oh man, I'm the one who kind of like did these things to others. So just be aware of what's going on. Be sensitive for anything that's going on in your youth ministry, especially at the time that you're teaching this series, because it could kind of, just bring up some interesting conversations in discussion time. So just be aware.
Yes. And then the third and final tip is get aligned with your kids and adult small groups ministry. So if you are using Grow in other ministries, such as your children's ministry or adult ministry, the kids ministry version of RAD is Choose Your Own Adventure. And it actually uses James passages to teach kids about wisdom. And then the adult small groups, the series is called Not So Simple. And it's a kind of a grown-up version of this exact same series with the same big ideas, but it's just reframed for adults. So definitely a really cool way for your church to study the book of James together, and kind of be able to have conversations about James and what James looks like in each other's lives across all generations.
Yes, that is like the nice thing about James. Like it's pretty straight to the point. We can all apply it. We all get the idea. So it's great. So it's a good one to get aligned on. Well, friends, that is it. We hope that you have enjoyed this deep dive about our new series, Rad, by our very own David. And we are super excited to see what you do with the series. We would love to see your pictures, hear your stories, see videos if you're like using the 1-minute sermons and posting those on social media or whatever. We want to see them. So tag us or post them in the Stuff You Can Use Facebook group. We just kind of want to see how cool you are. So go ahead and brag. We enjoy it. We love to hear you brag. And then we will see you next month for another one of these deep dives. So we'll see you then. Bye.